Welcome to everyone, and guess what? Our convention starts now because this is one of our programs for pre-convention learning so that we can have a Shechianu moment at convention in July, on Monday, July 13th, if you've never worn tefillin, you can take the opportunity to put on tefillin, and we're learning about it now. So in order for us to be able to all hear, I'm going to mute everyone, and then I'm going to unmute Dr. Lerner once I finish speaking. Not what I'm supposed to do. Hold on one second.
I'll mute myself.
Okay. Don't worry, Dr. Lerner, I'll call you that for a little while, then I'll get to Anne. So this evening we have Dr. Anne Lapidus Lerner with us for Convention Starts Now. She'll be discussing the black boxes of Judaism, everything you want to learn about tefillin. So Dr. Anne Lapidus Lerner, who told me I should call her Anne, I met her in 1989 when she was dean of the Bliss College, and I was a junior in high school. Long time ago, and in 1989, she was already on the faculty of JTS for 20 years. First woman to serve as JTS Vice Chancellor, Dean of Bliss College, Associate Dean of the Gershon Kex Graduate School. She a pioneer in everything, a pioneer in being a complete mensch, but also a pioneer in the field of Jewish women's studies. So in 2014, she inaugurated the Paula E. Hyman Mentoring Program, which provides mentors for emerging scholars in fields of Jewish and gender issues. Since she was such an amazing dean of Bliss College, the undergraduate school at JTS, I took her up on the offer to continue in another program that she founded at JTS, the founding director of JTS Women's Studies Program. And it was an incredible experience being able to study with you in that. And now it's called the Jewish Gender and Women's Studies Program. Dr. Lerner, Anne, is a true friend and supporter of Women's League for Conservative Judaism. And although she never received the title, she truly is my rabbi, and she's a rabbi's rabbi and a scholar and a mensch, and you'll all be able to experience her learning with us this evening. I have to say that in the very beginning, she was the first woman I know who wore tefillin, who wasn't wearing tefillin because she was applying to rabbinical school. And I knew that this evening to learn about tefillin, she was the person to learn about it with. So it is a great honor to call my mentor now, Anne. And she's with us this evening. Please remember that if you want to chat, if you ask any questions, we do want to have conversation. You're on the chat box in the bottom, you can write in your comments and I'll be reading them to Dr. Lerner. We sent out some handouts earlier and we'll be using them on the screen as well. So I'm going to unmute Dr. Lerner, Anne, and it's her time to teach us.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. It's always a pleasure to be involved with Women's League. There's no question about it. What a wonderful group of members you have, and how interested everyone is in learning. All right, maybe not every last one, but there's this feeling in the group always that there's something out there in Judaism that I want to have for my own, and I want to study it. So, full disclosure, I'm an advocate here for women in tefillin, because it offers us the opportunity physically to embody our words and our thoughts through symbolic action. Now, there's when we actually do something and not just say it from the lips forward, we say in Hebrew, then we're doing it in a way that makes a mark. And as we discussed in our pre-conversation, the tefillin straps actually do make a mark. And it's another way, another sense, as we have touched now, that enables us to try to reach for that experience of closeness to God. So before I get farther into the topic, though, I want to pause for a minute and say my thank you to Rabbi Ellen Wollens Fields, also known as Ellen, who was so generous in helping me put together the pamphlet and inviting me to do this, and has been a wonderful person in my life. She's wonderful. She can do anything. And also I wanted to thank Razel Kessler, who was helpful with the putting together of the packet and saved me the problem of trying to do it with my so-called eyesight. So thank you both. Also, Ellen did some groundbreaking research on this subject for her senior thesis at Barnard, and she's been part of it ever since. That photo that you may or may not be able to see behind my head, which is Frederick Brenner's photo of a minion of women in Tefillin. How did he learn about women in Tefillin? Ellen offered to give him a copy of her thesis so that he could learn more about it. And that was very helpful in getting the picture done. So I wanted to show you first Tefillin, but I don't want to unwrap mine, frankly, because they're wrapped in a very complicated way. And
so that's the picture of that Dr. Lerner was referring to, that Anne was referring to. I'll stop sharing screen now. Okay.
Okay, so here, these are my Tefillin, or one of my pairs of Tefillin. And they are, of course, black boxes. The red is just the protective plastic case. Everything that's important to know about the Tefillin is black, incidentally. Black boxes, the original black box. And I also have with me a pair of Tefillin that are pasul, that are not usable, because a sofer somewhere decided that the parchment wasn't clearly enough visible. In other words, whoever had written them had made mistakes, or whoever had written them, somehow over time the ink had worn off. So these will show you this is the Tefillin, we call them a bayit, like a house. This is the Tefillin for the head. And notice it has 4 compartments. You can see the lines. Can you see that? All right, I guess I can't hear the answer because you've been muted.
Yes, they can see it.
Okay, and there's a shin on each side. This side has a regular shin, looks like all the other shins we know. And this one has a special Kabbalistic shin, which has an extra, it has, instead of 3 verticals, it has 4 verticals. And it gives one a better view of what's going on actually inside these Tefillin. And the other one, which is right here. No, it's not right here. Come on, Anne. You can see is one, I think you can see is one piece, okay? So just to be sure we all know what we're talking about. They contain 4 passages. They both contain the same 4 passages, 2 from Exodus and 2 from Deuteronomy. And they use these words to place these devarim, or these words, as a sign on your hands and as a frontlet between your eyes. Now, the word tefillin does not appear at all in the Torah, in the Tanakh. It's a later word, came in later. The word that appears is the word totafot, and that appears in 3 of the 4 passages. So if we have a word that appears in only three times in the Torah, and we don't know what it means, and it's always in the same context, which doesn't help us a whole lot, it's hard to figure out what they are. Tefillin in English is, it's so frustrating for me not to be able to hear you. The English word for tefillin is phylacteries, which is actually a Greek word and was used to translate tefillin in the Gospel of Matthew. And that word means amulets. And one of the ways of thinking about tefillin is that indeed they are amulets. They are ways in which we try to bring ourselves closer to God or to have an impact on what God is planning. But they are so different from other amulets that we sort of bristle at the idea that they should be called the same way. So I want to talk personally for a bit. I had a hard time accepting tefillin. There's no question about it. It was just so male. I couldn't make them my own. It's not that I didn't like them. I loved them. I loved them because every morning my father would get up and daven in tefillin. And I sort of felt that that's why the sun came up, was because Abba was davening in tefillin. And it was such an important part of my growing up, but it wasn't an important part of me. So as my younger brother, Bob, in case any of you know him, took on the mitzvah, then it was Abba and Bobby who were davening in tefillin. But it never dawned on me to join them. It was sort of like the other things. I went to shul every Shabbat, but other things, kippah, talit, davening regularly every day, they were just not part of my world. In fact, I thought that not having these responsibilities made my life much easier. And I never would have occurred to me. There were no role models for women who were looking to daven and tefillin. There was nobody out there whom you could follow, whose lead you could follow. So I'd like to, this is a rare experience for me to be teaching where I can't get any feedback. It's frustrating. So I want to open it up for you to jump in and talk about your experience, whether positive or negative, with tefillin. And Ellen will make sure that only one person talks at a time.
I actually unmuted everyone, and if you're muted, it's by your own wish. Just press the little bottom thing, like Jeanette just unmuted herself, I think. So if anyone, Anne, you want people to make comments?
I do.
Okay. So jump on in if anyone wants to.
I'll share. I wasn't even raised with the talit growing up.
And who is this? Oh, Debbie. Okay.
Debbie Lambert. Okay. But when I started davening Erev Rosh Hashanah services, they said you need to wear a talit. That's when I got my first one. And I have never been interested in using tefillin. However, when my daughter became bat mitzvah, I supported her 100%. It wasn't right for me, but that doesn't mean it wasn't right for her. But when this opportunity came up, I said, let's learn more about it. I don't have anything against it. It was just not what I was raised with, and didn't have any female role models growing up with it. So, but now I do.
So I think that's an experience that a lot of women have, is that kippah, we can do kippah. After all, we put stuff on our heads. And talit, a talit is a shawl or a scarf, depending on what size it is. So that's okay. But what is the big difference of tefillin?
The tefillin are they're heavy, they're male, they're leather. And you're wrapping yourself up in leather, and it's just a different kind of experience. So I'm still getting used to it.
Mm-hmm. It's a very different kind of experience. And I think that there are real reasons why women hesitate to do it. It's not clear to me why the black boxes with their rectilinear lines register in our heads as male, but for some reason, a lot of the time they do. I remember seeing years ago in the HUC museum here in New York that there was a pair of women's tefillin, which were oval boxes covered with, it looked like velvet and blue ribbon straps, and they were really very pretty. I just couldn't see them as tefillin either. But it was such a clear way of saying we want something different. We don't want to be the same. And I think that's the core issue here. I think it's that we have constructed gender in a certain way. In other words, tefillin have been constructed because these things are social constructs. We see tefillin as male, and then they become, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, they become male because women shy away from them. There are all sorts of reasons why women, for banning women from tefillin that have been broached over the years. Anyone want to jump in and talk about the bans?
It's time-based. It's time, and women in the Talmud, I learned this today, were not obligated to the positive time-based mitzvot.
Mm-hmm. So the one place, and we'll get to a text on that a little bit, and one reason is that women are exempted from time-bound mitzvot. Not all of them, incidentally, but many of them. It's sort of a principle, and sometimes it isn't operative. So that's one reason. But there's a difference between being banned and not being allowed. You know, there's a difference between not being, I'm sorry, I said that backwards. There is a difference between not being obligated and not being allowed. And that's an important difference. Anyone else?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I grew up in a family where my father and brother laid tefillin together many times during the week. And then in school, I learned the story from the Mishnah about what did Moses see when God hit him in the rock. And the answer that was given was he saw the knot in the back of God's tefillin. And I knew I was going to wear that someday. That was my goal, was to wear that knot.
yeah, that's a beautiful thought, that God has tefillin too. And I was going to get to that a little later, but it's so, like, how could you imagine that God wouldn't daven in tefillin? It's impossible. Well, how could we perceive God other than with tefillin? Do you remember what's in God's tefillin?
Yeah, he talks about mankind.
More, I think, about Israel, about the people Israel. Mi ka'amcha Yisrael, who is like your people Israel? Goy echad ba'aretz, one nation, or a singular nation. What echad means is always a question too. Among the nation, on the earth. So God, just as the Shema, first line of the Shema opens and talks about God being echad, here, in God's tefillin, they also say that the people Israel is echad. And it's a very nice reciprocal admiration, etc. So there's no place in the tefillin, in the Torah, that says that women can't lay tefillin, just in case I wasn't clear. Gender is so interesting, the way it constructs what we do. When I get 12 or 13, about 12 or 13, I don't remember which, my rabbi, Israel Kazis, who was then rabbi of Temple Mishkan Tefillah in Roxbury, was still in Roxbury, that's how old I am. And he called. He was a friend of my parents, and he often had Friday night, before he remarried, he often had Friday night dinner at our house. So we were on we had a good relationship. And he called, he wanted to speak to me, and he wanted to offer me the opportunity to be the first bat mitzvah at the shul. And he was arguing with me he kept saying that it was really important that they would serve petit fours, which was not, but that was, a draw, and that he felt that I should be the one to do it. And I said, no, I won't do it. My Latin book happened to have been open on my lap at the time. I was in a negative position there. And so I said, I won't do it. And he said, why won't you do it? I said, I don't think women belong on the bima. I think the bima is all for men. And because it's for men, they are, the bima it's not, I'm not going to go up there on the bima, because women don't do that. And I didn't have a bat mitzvah, neither did my younger sister, because of, we objected. The bat mitzvah came into the shul and everything. It didn't depend on us, but I was sure that that I was right and he was wrong. And the difference in age and education didn't matter. So if we go back to or I guess ahead from Mishkan Tefillah to the 1970s, I sort of began my slow and considered move toward egalitarianism. I actually used to daven in a tichel and a shawl, a kerchief covering my head, and I gave up the kerchief and started to daven in a kippah. I bought a shawl at a crafts fair and had my sister, I think, put the tzitzit on it. And I was pretty sure that I had gone the distance, that I was where I needed to be. I had accepted previously the chiyuv, the obligation to daven, in tefillin even. But I knew a lot of men who had that obligation. They came by it by being men, and they didn't daven in talis and tefillin. They didn't daven at all. So I figured I would be one of them, that I would feel I was obligated because I couldn't think of a reason why I wouldn't be, and that we could, and that I didn't have to actually do it. So before we go back to my personal experience, I want to look at some of the passages that go into tefillin. So if you look at your handout, numbered 1, you'll find the verses from Exodus 13. Okay, someone care to read them in either English or Hebrew? Don't all jump at once.
And you can unmute yourself if you want to.
We're not up to 13 on the picture on the screen.
It should be. 13, 1 to 10.
Yes.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Raizel, you want to read?
Okay.
Thank
Okay,
you.
I'll read the English. The Lord spoke further to Moses, saying, consecrate to me every firstborn, man and beast. The first issue of every womb among the Israelites is mine. And Moses said to the people, remember this day on which you went free from Egypt, the house of bondage. Whoops, I lost it.
Okay, sorry about that. Yep.
Okay. How the Lord freed you from it with a mighty hand, no leavened bread shall be eaten. You go free on this day in the month of Abib. So when the Lord has brought you into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, which he swore to your fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, you shall observe in this month the following practice. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. Throughout the 7 days, unleavened bread shall be eaten. No leavened bread shall be found with you, and no leaven shall be found in all your territory. And you shall explain to your son on that day, it is because of what the Lord did for me when I went free from Egypt. And this shall serve you as a sign on your hand and as a reminder on your forehead, in order that the teaching of the Lord may be in your mouth, that with a mighty hand the Lord freed you from Egypt. You shall keep this institution at its set time from year to year.
Okay, so what's the purpose of that passage? What's the author of that passage trying to say? What's it about?
Observing Passover.
Observing Passover. In other words, it's not focused on tefillin.
That's true.
It's there almost as an afterthought, and this is how you'll really remember it, and you have to teach it to your children.
No, to your son.
Now, so thank you, that gives me the exact opening that I was looking for, to give you a little lesson in Hebrew grammar, or maybe it's a refresher. Hebrew, unlike English, but like other languages, French, for example, has only two genders, masculine and feminine. There's no neuter. There's no way to say it in Hebrew. There are ways around it, but the bottom line is there's no word that's clearly it. And if your child is going out to visit a friend, assuming he or she is telling the truth, then you know whether it's a chaver, masculine, or a chavera, feminine. In other words, there's no way of eliminating that in Hebrew. So when it says your son, bincha, which looks like your son, does it always mean specifically male, or does it sometimes mean male or female? And that's a big problem we'll get to in a minute in terms of tefillin. When is it masculine and when is it human or Jewish or Israelite, depending upon what period we're talking about. So thank you for the opening. In fact, if you look at the second passage, excuse me, from Exodus, you'll note that it is in some ways similar. It's talking about what will happen when they get to the land of Canaan, and it's sort of an afterthought. And so it shall be a sign upon, and now I'm looking at 13:16, and which is text 2. And so it shall be as a sign upon your hand and as a symbol on your forehead, that with a mighty hand the Lord freed us from Egypt. So we're talking about coming out of Egypt. Pharaoh's in here, And this is sort of an afterthought. It's not the central thesis of the passage. But now if we turn instead to Deuteronomy 6:4-9, which is the third passage in your packet, we come to something that is much more familiar to us. Because Devarim 6:4-9 contains verses that basically talk about the relationship between us and God. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. I don't know why everyone translates it, O Israel, but hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Now, what's the difference between that and the usual translation?
Usually we say one.
It was alone instead of one.
Right. So then one of the meanings of echad is alone, and one of the meanings of echad is one, and one of them is singular, like singular that means also outstanding. And it's not clear which of these meanings is the primary meaning, but whatever it is, it seems to be a good thing. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol meodecha. Now we come into the part that has pronouns, and pronouns in Hebrew are either masculine or feminine. Oh, and a group of people, if there are, this is no longer obtains, but until a couple of years ago, proper Hebrew was you could have 1,000 women in a room, and as soon as there was a man there, you'd use the masculine plural. Now, the Israel Academy for Hebrew Language a couple of years ago, it's probably more than a couple now, suggested that that wasn't the way to go. That instead, if it's a group that is overwhelmingly women, it's the presence of one man doesn't make one stop using the feminine plural. You can use the feminine plural. I once gave a talk to a bunch after this had happened, to a bunch of Israeli educators, and there was I think one man there, and the rest of them were women, and I was giving the talk in Hebrew, and so I used the feminine. And right away, hands went up, correcting my Hebrew. And I said, no, you go back and you look and see what the Academy has done to change that. So that's yet another factor in terms of Hebrew grammar. Anyhow, okay, so someone want to continue reading here, V'ahavta?
Want it in English or Hebrew?
Either.
I'll read it for you.
Thank you.
You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. Take to heart these which I charge you this day. Impress them upon your children. Write them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand and let them serve as a symbol on your forehead. Inscribe them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates.
Okay, thank you. So whom is this directed to?
The people Israel.
The people Israel. Why don't we think it's the men of the people Israel? See, the you in here is consistently masculine singular. Every single time the you appears in the English, it's masculine singular in the Hebrew. So whereas in English, we can say, well, you, it means everyone. But in fact, it could even be a plural. But in Hebrew, you can't do that. So my question, I want to open up. I don't want to say that the way I would read this is the only way to read it. I would say the text is ambiguous. It can be read in different ways. And one of the ways in which we can read it is by looking at the context. So we start with the importance of loving God. Notice, incidentally, sometimes people say that Judaism is not, unlike Christianity, is not a religion of love. There's so much love in the Chumash. So here we have, and you shall love the Lord your God, b'chol levavcha, with your whole heart, b'chol nafshecha, with your whole soul, v'chol meodecha, with all your might. So who's commanded to do that?
Everyone.
Everybody.
You. Does it include women or not?
Yes.
Well, not according to the grammar. If you say that it's in the male,
Mm-hmm.
but it does say children, so it doesn't say male children. I don't know
Right.
about the Hebrew.
Mm-hmm. So it's been read, I think that women are obliged to love God just as men are obliged to love God. And if that's the case, then the rest of it, every time you see that masculine singular, you know that it could be feminine singular as well. There's just no way of doing it in Hebrew. So I would argue that when it says, impress them upon your children, okay, in verse 7, Vishinantam levanecha, you teach them to your children, you could say, no, that's your sons. But I would say that throughout, it includes women. It just doesn't include them very openly. And there are a couple of other reasons to think that this might be addressing the wider community. For example, the very opening of the book of Devarim, of Deuteronomy, that this is in. Deuteronomy basically is a series of Moses's farewell addresses, because he knows they're ready to cross the Jordan and he's not going. So when the book is open, when Devarim opens, it says, Vayidaber Moshe et kol hadvarim ha'ele, and Moses said all of these words. El kol Yisrael, to all Israel. It doesn't say l'chol b'nei Yisrael, to all the sons, or maybe it's children of Israel. And so even as we move through the book, I would argue that it's the same audience. And if it's the same audience, it includes women as well as men. When did the question of women and tefillin first arise? Oh, excuse me. I skipped a source. Look at source 4. This is what we call the second paragraph of the Shema, usually when we refer to it. And it's also from Devarim, from Deuteronomy 11. And it lays out the responsibilities of the Israelites. And one of the things that's intriguing to me about this is sometimes the text uses the masculine singular, you, and sometimes the plural for you. And when it's the plural, it's much more obvious that it can include women. So I think that's yet another reason why we might say that that it works for that God had women as well in mind here. Okay, now we move on to source 5. This is from the Mishnah. The Mishnah was edited probably sometime around the year 250 of the Common Era but many of the traditions that are in the Mishnah were around before. So the Mishnah in Brachot, which is the first section of the Mishnah, says women and bondsmen and underage are exempt from reading the Shema and from Tefillin, and they are bound to observe prayer, in other words, to say the Amidah and Mezuzah and Birkat Hamazon. So that doesn't say that women cannot do it, but it sort of raises the issue of whether or not women are included in these ritual requirements. So that would seem to say, well, not obligated. It doesn't say not allowed. The Midrash in Mechilta tells us that Michal, the daughter of Cushi, which was, I guess, King Saul's nickname, used to don tefillin. And the wife of Jonah, the prophet, did you know he had a wife? Went up to Jerusalem for the pilgrimage festivals. And Tabi, Rabbi Gamliel's bondsman, his Eved, used to don tefillin. So these are three examples, two of which have to do with tefillin, of people who are exempt from tefillin, exempt from something, are allowed to do it. And the next passage, number 7, Romans 7, says, we've learned that we've heard these stories and they did these things, and the Chachamim, the rabbis, didn't object. So they must be okay, otherwise they would object. The Tosfot, who are the grandsons of Rashi, the famous Bible and Talmud commentator, said women should not wear tefillin if they are not sufficiently clean. One of the reasons given for not being able to wear tefillin, for eliminating women from wearing them, in other words, not obligating them, but obligating them not to, is what's called guf naki, a clean body. So in the rabbinic period, theoretically, men wore tefillin all day long. Now, I think that's not exactly the truth, because people had real jobs. I mean, you know, there were cobblers and threshers and people who took care of animals and stuff like that, where it's clearly inappropriate to be wearing tefillin that have parchments with God's name on them. So number one, it's not clear to me that it ever happened, but let's assume that it did, or at least assume that it did for the rabbinic elite, for the, you know, people who were the rabbis, basically, and they needed better to incorporate others, I guess, in my point of view. But here's the way in which guf naki is spelled out, but guf naki applies to men as well as to women, because really if men are doing something that's not clean, I mean, they're taking care of animals, then they can't wear their tefillin then either. Some people think that guf naki has to do with menstruation. Other people say, and this is the one that I found most convincing, was that it has to do with intestinal gas, basically. That we all have some sort of odor. And Rabbi Joel Roth, who is a good friend as well as a respected colleague, has a very long footnote to his paper about why women can serve as rabbis, that talks about how he investigated this subject because he couldn't figure out what the Guf Naki really was. And he spoke to all sorts of people, including psychologists, not just, other rabbis. And they concluded that since in that period, men and women were generally not found in mixed groups, they didn't have trouble then getting a sisterhood together. Men and women were together. The men were with the men, and the women with the women. Then were unaccustomed to the odor of men. Were unaccustomed to the odor of women, and women were unaccustomed to the odor of men. And so they assumed that it was caused by some sort of lack of cleanliness, which of course it wasn't. So then that's another reason given for why women can't fulfill this. As we go on through Jewish history, Rashi said, whose dates are 1040 to 1105, that it would be okay for women to put on tefillin, but they really shouldn't. Maimonides said it was okay, but you can't say the bracha, you can't say the blessing, because you were not commanded. Who commanded us to put on tefillin? And by the Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah said, you shouldn't do it at all. Women shouldn't do it at all. So that's where we are in terms of allowing women. Now, if you have questions, this is very frustrating to a very informal teacher who doesn't like frontal presentations. Anyone willing to jump in?
And you're all unmuted. So if you want to speak, you also can just click your own little box there as well. And if you can't figure out how to unclick your box, I can help you.
So this is Idel. I think that what all of these texts show is that it was a common practice. And it wasn't anything out of the ordinary. They were just trying to say, it's okay that women are doing this, or that the non-Jew was doing this, the bondsman. But it was something that they lived with and they saw all around them.
Mm-hmm. I think that that's correct. And I think that in that time, they were so used to having gender separate things. I mean, they did that in our time too, and still do. That it didn't bother people the way it bothers people today. And I think that's important to bear in mind. I'm not saying, oh, those rabbis, they were terrible. They were bad people. I'm saying quite simply that now that we see women in all sorts of roles and we realize that they can do them well, there's no reason to eliminate them from the real joy of the experience of binding God to oneself. There's in one of the early classes of JTS rabbinical school that included women, one of the second career students was a poet. And she came with, I think, relatively little background in Judaism, but a really wonderful imagination. One day she stopped me in the hall and she said, God is so lucky. And I'm like, okay, God is so lucky, how come? I wish I remembered her name. And she said, God is so lucky because when God writes a poem with metaphors, God can make sure that we actually use them. And the example, of course, would be tefillin, that it's a metaphor for closeness. The line from the prophet Hosea, whom I'm sure Janet will go over with you next time, that says, and I shall bind you to me forever.
Feminine.
Right? That's not just it's not just words. It's actually deeds when you consider tefillin.
I put it up on the screen, the Hosea.
Thank you.
And when I read that, it's very comforting because it's in feminine.
Mhm.
It's almost like it was really made for us as women.
Yes, yes, because there we see ve'erastich. It's couched as a man speaking to a woman. And it's interesting also to think of that, because who is the man? The underlying construction of the book of Hosea is that Hosea has a wife, and the wife is not behaving according to the way she should, and she runs off all the time, runs off with men all the time, and he has a lot of trouble keeping her under control. She probably has a lot of trouble keeping herself under control too. So then he brings her back and he says, and ve'erastich li le'olam, I'm forever, I bind you to me. And that's the verse that is inside countless wedding rings and engagement rings, and also the words we recite as we bind the tefillin around the fingers of our hands. We are binding God to us. Anyone else? So let me take you back to my journey. So there I was in the 1970s, very proud of having a talit, and very happy to have a kippah, and not really thinking about tefillin. But we were coming up to our son's bar mitzvah. And it was in the days, remember there were Russian twins? If you
Yes.
had a bar mitzvah, you got your kid a Russian twin.
Yeah.
So our son, who went to Ramaz, it's a liberal Orthodox yeshiva in New York, said that, I said to him, I'm going to use the tefillin. I had bought tefillin that summer, the summer of his bar mitzvah, it was 1984, in Jerusalem, in the same store we bought him his bar mitzvah tefillin. And I bought a pair for myself. I actually stole them. I paid for them, but I stole them because my husband thought it was a crazy idea for me to try to buy them in Mea Sharim, of course, that we'd be lucky to get out in one piece. And I said, no, you just play along with me and we'll take care of it. So we go into the store and he says, just make sure David gets his before you do anything. So we got David his tefillin. And then I said, oh my God, you know what we forgot, Steve? George, the guy from our shul, he wanted you to get him tefillin from Israel. I don't think he needs really heavy tefillin like David's. I think, smaller, lighter would be a way to go. But I think you should really do it, and we're not going to come back here to the tefillin shop again. And Steve played along with me, and so the guy handed us was willing to be paid for the tefillin. And he said, but how will you adjust the head? I said, oh, his head's probably about the same size as mine. So I had tefillin, but I hadn't used them. So that was, his bar mitzvah was coming up. His bar mitzvah was Labor Day weekend, and we'd been in Israel, I guess, toward the end of July. And I said, I'm going to wear my tefillin at your bar mitzvah. And he said, no, you're not.
Oh, boy.
And I said, no, really, I haven't been to a weekday service, but if I had been, I would have davened in tefillin. So he said, you don't really do it. And I said, but I want to do it. It's my choice. And he said, my friends will be embarrassed. And my husband chimed in and said, well, you could just say that that's our minhag, that's our custom.
Mm-hmm.
And David said, no one's fool, said, yeah, sure. And they'll look around and see that nobody else has tefillin on except for Ima. I don't think that's going to work. So finally, as a bar mitzvah present, I gave him the opportunity to take my tefillin and put them on the seat of his twin from Russia. And so they were symbolically present. But the truth is that it was with my father's death when I started saying Kaddish that I realized that I had to take the leap and actually use them every day because I was davening every morning. And it became a really important piece of my getting through the loss and also building this kind of relationship with God that I was hoping to build. So what do we think of the prospects for women in Women's League?
Well, many years ago, I think it was Charlie Simon who came and he taught. He came specifically for the day and he taught us to wear tefillin.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first time. I already had tefillin, but that was the first time that I wore them.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a similar, sure.
I remember at an early convention, actually it was the last one at the Concord, which was the first convention that I went to. And Edya Arts used to teach the using, she would help anybody who was interested in trying tefillin for the first time. And I thought it was odd that they didn't bring along an extra pair for somebody to use. They're offering you want to try it? And I said, yeah, I'll try it. And then they're asking me, where's my tefillin? I said, I don't have tefillin.
Right.
I had them, I might have tried it already, So then, skip years later, then Judy Kenter was doing the same sort of thing, helping people, anybody who was interested, but still they didn't bring along an extra pair for people to use. So I'm just saying that we should have that.
Yeah, I think sometimes, I know in shuls that I've been connected to, the rabbi has, or the shul has, spare pairs of tefillin. It's unfortunately following a death particularly.
Yeah.
It's nice people sometimes donate tefillin to the shul if there's nobody in the family to give them to. And so that's one thing that I think people should, I agree with you. It's very hard to do if you've never done it before, and they're expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So you're asked to make an investment sort of without the opportunity to see how they work. And I think that's important.
It's easier if there was an extra set, then the person who is teaching you could still be wearing hers.
Yes, much
I don't
easier.
want her to take hers off to help me, because I want to see it so I could be like copying what she's doing. It's easier to see it in front of you.
Right. So I think tefillin mentors ought to have spare tefillin. I agree with you.
Okay. That was my piece.
So by my watch, we've pretty much come up to the end of our time together. So I want to thank you for introducing me to, I guess I should have said a Shechianu, to a Zoom class. It's going to take time to get adjusted to, but it's like tefillin. But I want to leave you with this thought that there's a reciprocity between it's God in search of man. Oh, I mean human.
Yeah.
And not just humans in search of God. It's a relationship that we're looking for. And those two pieces, the Shema line, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, that ends so strongly on the Echad, and the verse from First Chronicles, that Mika Amcha Yisrael, who is like your people, Israel, Goy Echad Ba'aretz, a singular and unusual nation in the world. Those two lines sort of bracket that, they make that relationship by echoing the Echad. And I think was that God did well to choose that line for God's tefillin, because it works on the relationship. And it's a relationship we have to work on. There are many benefits to it. So thank you very much for sharing this and some of your experiences with me. And I don't know, do you have the closing word there, Ellen?
Well, if you have time, were there any pressing questions for people that they wanted to ask?
I have time.
Anne is
I
in.
wanted to make a
Yes.
comment that for me, I've been always feeling uncomfortable. I've known that women have permission to wear a tefillin, but I've never felt like it was something I wanted to do. And hearing what you've said tonight has been helpful to me to bring in some new ways of thinking about it, because it's always felt very foreign to me.
Mhm. One of the other reasons that people sometimes feel that women shouldn't do it is an interesting reason, because it has to do with what's going on in society, sort of. It's the question of yohara. Some people say yohara is a word that means pride. But it's the bad kind of pride. In other words, that you are proudful yourself. And so in a way, it's a saying that putting on tefillin for a woman is a way of saying, look at what I can do. I can do tefillin. Of course, the only reason that might be mistaken for yohara is because so few women do it. But if everyone did it, then it would be the norm, right? So my goal is to get more people to do it till it becomes the norm, and then it's not a problem. It's clear, and each of us can make a step in that direction.
But there was that awkwardness when women, I belonged to a conservative shul, and I was the first woman to put on a talit, and I wasn't sure if there would be lightning. And so now my shul is egalitarian, but we closed, we moved. But as more and more people, it's just getting used to seeing more and more people of the community doing something. And it's not odd anymore. It's almost odd to see a woman, especially when it comes to a Women's League convention. It's unusual to see a woman not have a talit on.
Right.
Not all the time, but certainly when they daven.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would assume that tefillin will have its up and coming, it'll rise in its commonality and would not be so odd to do it. And
well, I don't know if you took a good look at the, I promised my son something I have to do. This is my tefillin bag. Okay, see?
Mm-hmm.
It says tefillin, that's good. And down here it says, Le'imi morati mi David. To my mother, my teacher from David, my son.
When did he give
had
it to you?
Small tefillin, which I still have, but he felt he totally turned around on this issue, because when he was bar mitzvahed, he was thinking about those other kids from Ramaz who would make fun of him. He didn't realize that most of them wouldn't come, and he's become a huge advocate for tefillin. And his eldest is a girl who's now a first year in college, but she's also committed to tefillin.
And Sharon, his wife, used to rap also, I think.
Yes.
I don't know if she still does, but she did at some point.
I don't know if she does either. And so it's nice to be able to try to so I wanted to mention that, because he didn't want, I said, can I tell you a story? And he said, yeah, but make sure you show them the bag in the end, so they don't think I'm still close.
make sure at convention that if anyone has a spare pair from a deceased, God, may they rest in peace, whatever, we should bring them. Like I brought my husband's. I have the chazan that was killed in Israel in the office. I always forget his name, Anne. Maybe you remember the chazan that was in the flood in the saving his wife, and he passed. I have his tefillin. Yeah, you know who he is.
Yes.
I have Allison tefillin. His mom gave it to me, and it's in the office, so I'll bring it to convention. And so
Great. That's good.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think it's such a powerful experience that we can try it. We can try it first in the privacy of our homes, incidentally, because this came as news to somebody recently whom I talked to a while back, that you can daven alone at home, and to put on tefillin the first time in front of the gallery watching, and we always think, you know, like they're watching me. I think that's really tough. Also for women, women's clothing is not designed with tefillin in mind, right? Because, yeah, they don't, I think that we should make Amazon shirts that have one missing, sleeve missing, so that we can lay tefillin more easily. And that's also an issue for women. There are so many things that, you know, clutter up the experience. But if one tries it at home for a while, then I think that it's much easier to do it in public, as it were.
You didn't mention tefillin hair.
Oh, I didn't. You're right.
Yeah.
Probably all thought
Yes.
Like that with the kippah on Shabbat morning. My hair looks nice, and by the time I leave services, it's all completely flat, and it's keep ahead.
Right. Yeah, it's another problem. But I think it's worth making a good faith attempt to get past the problems and to the experience and see what it can do to enrich our lives.
Thank you.
Thank
So,
you.
Anne, thank you so much. This was wonderful, educational, Yasher Kochech. And as you can see, convention starts now. We can look forward to being together. Many of us wrapping tefillin for the first time, having a Shechianu moment, similar to Anne this evening, teaching on Zoom. So if you want to say the Shechianu, you can. It's up to your hashkach, whatever your thinking is. And also, the reason why we're doing this now, in addition to preparing for convention, is that on February 2nd will be, I believe it's the 20th Worldwide Wrap, when Men's Club encourages the mitzvah of tefillin. And last year, we joined with them. You can look on our website of Women's League, My Tefillin 101, 7 weeks, I think it was 7 weeks.
Yes,
Teaching
very
about
good. Worth looking at.
Thank you. And this year, you'll see from it's on the sheet of some of the text that we sent for today, and also for Janet's program for next Thursday. The cheat sheet on how to put on tefillin has not only the Men's Club logo on it, but Women's League's logo as well. And it truly has become a joint effort to show that tefillin is egalitarian and crosses the
When
gender.
they first started to publish that in men's clubs, and
Mhm.
it's since gone well beyond it. They published it in 2 editions, one for Canada, which didn't talk about women, and one for the States that did.
And they had
And
2
I was
different
asked to write
videos.
something for the women, you know, so I did, but whatever.
Yeah, they had an egalitarian putting on tefillin video, a non-egalitarian, and now they have our logo on it, and it's jointly together that we encourage women to wrap tefillin. So I hope that you will all join us again next Thursday night at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, when our own Janet Kirshner, I'm very tired, I'm sorry. Janet Kirshner will be teaching us about wrapping tefillin. Also, on the emails we've been sending, there are at least 2 places that we know are friendly to be selling tefillin. Men's Club has a few from Hex, the store in Brooklyn, because that's where I originally got my tefillin. A very from store, Orthodox in Brooklyn. And then there's a store in Teaneck as well that we can arrange for people to get, and you can have in your sisterhood gift shops as well.
Yeah, they're also an Orthodox store.
Right.
Teaneck.
Yeah, quite.
And it was wonderful learning with you, Anne. If you want to say the Shechianu for your first Zoom teaching, that was incredible, you could, and it's our honor to say Amen to you.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehachianu v'kimanu v'higianu lazman hazeh.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Erev Tov to all, and a Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.